EM1 Mark II. Some reviewers have chosen it as the camera of the year. A few weeks ago, I made a video wondering if it was going to be my perfect do-it-all camera. Let's talk reality. I've been using this camera for almost 2 months now, including a week-long trip in sub-freezing temperatures in Alaska. And I'm ready to share what I love about it, what I don't love about it, and whether or not it can replace 2 cameras for me, that being the Sony a7R Mark II, mostly for photos, and the GH4 from Panasonic, which I'm using to film this right now, and I use for video, vlogging, and time-lapse. Now, one of the real strengths of this Olympus EM1 Mark II is its dual stabilization system, the Sync-IS. That is the sensor and electronic stabilization combined together. Video side of things, it is an absolute joy to shoot with. The footage looks beautiful. I shot a ton of footage in Alaska, and I love how it all looks, even without a gimbal. On the photo side of things, I could shoot 2, 3, and maybe even 4-second exposures handheld. That's pretty amazing. The longer exposures people are talking about, 5 and maybe even 10 seconds, you have to have their 12 to 100 lens. That has stabilization built in. Combined with the camera stabilization gives you what Olympus calls Sync-IS. And that's a ridiculously long exposures. That's pretty cool to be able to do that. One of the other strengths of this camera, and I've talked about cameras before just being tools that let us get jobs done. Sometimes it's fun to use them. Sometimes you just need it to work. Well, this camera packs in a huge amount of features. The way I think of it is one of those Swiss Army knives, the really thick ones. I mean, the amount of features beyond the stabilization they've packed in here include ridiculously fast autofocus, 60 frames per second raw shooting when you half press the shutter button, 18 frames per second with autofocus tracking, silent shooting, the high-res shooting, you've got the live bulb, live timer, live composite, that 4K video, built-in time-lapse. Makes this an Olympus an extremely flexible and versatile tool and gives you the freedom to do what you want and customize it the way you want. You can even switch the on-off button to other functions. That's some serious customizability. It might be a little too much, as I spent more time in the manual for this camera than I have for any previous camera that I've reviewed. And I actually got it to lock up several times after I customized it a bit. I reset it, and went a little lighter on the customizations, and I haven't had any issues since then. And it's all packed into this portable and rugged body that I didn't worry about using in sub-zero temperatures. It was extremely cold. In fact, I left the camera outside for several hours at -20 Fahrenheit, battery in my pocket inside nice and warm, and it continued to perform flawlessly when, of course, I put the battery back in. Battery life in normal temperatures is decent, and if you have 2 batteries, you should be able to get through a day of mixed photo and videos just fine. And the charger is quick charge, which is really helpful. The dual card slots are nice, and you have an excellent amount of flexibility in how you use those 2 cards. Backup / redundancy, or you can save photos to one and video to the other. I was, for the most part, happy with the image and video quality. I mean, excellent quality in great detail under ISO 1600. Above that, things can get rough in some situations, but a little noise reduction and I'm still, for the most part, happy. If I look back at some of my favorite images of 2016, the vast majority were made under ISO 1600, which I mostly mention as a way for you to look back over your images to decide just how important clean, higher ISO is. One of the goals of the Alaska trip was Northern Lights photography, and they're actually best shot at shorter exposures and higher ISOs. And you know, the Olympus didn't handle that as well as the Sony. That's to be expected. Micro Four Thirds sensor versus a full frame sensor. I got usable shots, but really appreciate the flexibility of Sony when I need those higher ISOs and I know they're going to be clean. Video quality is certainly good, though the Panasonic GH4 4K and 1080 video look a little bit better to me in most situations. But of course, the GH4 is not stabilized. For that, we're waiting for the GH5, or as many of you mentioned in my Ditching Sony video, the G85, which at half the price looks as good, if not slightly better, for video. For photos, the G85 does not offer all the bells and whistles, certainly not as good as capturing fast action as the Olympus is, but generally on par and actually offers more lenses than Olympus with their dual IS, which Olympus is calling that sync IS. So a quick summary of this camera's strengths. This is a fantastic all-around camera, packed full of features in this nicely portable, rugged body with fantastic stabilization and good image quality, especially at the lower ISOs, and very nice video stabilization. Let's talk some weaknesses of the Olympus. The first in my mind is the low light performance. So over the last year, I've mostly shot with the Sony a7R II. Now this is a full frame sensor, one of the best in its class in both resolution and detail in low light. It's hard for me to not compare what I have now against this Olympus, but that honestly is not very fair. So I looked at matching it up against APS-C size sensors like the Sony a6300, a6500, the Nikon D500, and the Fuji XT-2. All of those cameras are definitely better in low light performance, but the Olympus isn't too far behind, and it even beats the Canon 80D. Keep in mind that the Olympus is stabilized, and many of those cameras I just listed weren't. That gives you some additional flexibility, shooting slower shutter speeds, so then you can keep your ISO down. But versus everything I just listed above, you are going to generally find your photos to be noisier. Now, the most fair comparison is putting this Micro Four Thirds sensor against the other ones on the market, and it is current king in low light performance. However, figuring out the true value here is tricky. At $2,000, this is not a cheap camera, and it's more expensive than everything I just compared it to. So then you have to start deciding exactly how much is it worth to you to go smaller and lighter. And the last point, as I start to price out lenses, what I mentioned is an already expensive camera. Well, it doesn't get any cheaper with the nicer lenses, and those weight savings start to vanish. Though your bag can certainly be smaller, and you may be able to leave some accessories behind, like a tripod, if you go with a 12-100. Or you could choose to go with cheaper and smaller prime lenses, which is a lot of fun, but if you want the very best, you're going to find that you're carrying a fair amount of weight and paying top dollar. Remember, I'm not only reviewing this camera, I'm also trying to figure out whether or not it can work for my needs and help me carry less and do the same job, maybe even better. One of my concerns was the Wi-Fi control, and while it is decent, it does give you more control than I initially saw. And autofocus, you got to do this kind of roundabout, focus in photo mode, then switch to video mode. That all's fine. But when you record remotely using an app, you're downgraded to 1080p. Here is a 4K camera that suddenly becomes 1080p. Now, as I was researching this and actually complaining online about it, someone pointed out with the Fuji, when you use the Wi-Fi app, you're downgraded to 720p. Why? I shoot in 4K. I buy cameras that can shoot in 4K these days. I want them to always be able to shoot in 4K. Why give me a camera that suddenly is downgraded to something significantly less for video work? That's frustrating. So just a quick thank you to Panasonic. Their Wi-Fi app is very good. No roundabout autofocusing, and I can continue to shoot in 4K. This entire video that I've shot today, I've done all by myself, set up the camera, walked over, made the focus work, started the recording, sometimes switched and changed settings to make it look a little bit better, and it works really, really well. And when you shoot in those very high bursts, the 60 frames per second or even the 18 frames per second, if you shoot a lot of those, you're going to be waiting to review them because you can't see any of them until they're all written to the card. And only one of those card slots is the very highest speed, so depending on how you have yours set up, you may be waiting a while. So in final summary, I really enjoyed using this camera. If you were looking for a Micro Four Thirds camera, top of the line. It's well suited for wildlife, sports, general travel photography, including vlogging style video. This is the best you can buy. But at its current cost, there are some competitors that, while they might not offer all of the bells or whistles or all of the portability, they do either outclass it in low light performance or resolution or both. And while I would love to simplify to one camera, one lens system, I'm just not willing to make this big a change in resolution or low light performance, especially when my GH4 still looks better on the video side of things, even if it isn't stabilized. I'll be looking at the Panasonic G85, and while I hope to review the Fuji XT-2 soon, it isn't in the running as a do-it-all replacement, despite many of you recommending it in my last Ditching Sony video. The 720p during remote use, the 10-minute limit to 4K without the grip, and the lack of fully articulating screen really means it cannot be a do-it-all camera for me. Hey, if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be back with lots more gear reviews, photography tips and tricks, and lots more in the future. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye. On the bus trail yet? Definitely not lost. Definitely not. See, I think we're right